As Lindsay said, my name's Brad, and we'll be discussing purchase and work orders today. As usual, we'll be using examples in both Design Manager and Design Manager Professional, and if you'd like to see a function in one or the other platforms, feel free to ask at one of the question periods, and I'll be happy to go over that again. Also, some features may only be available in one platform or the other. So let's go ahead and get started. Purchase orders are used to communicate the goods and, in some cases, the services you are requesting from a vendor, while work orders are used to communicate the desired services for fabrication, reupholstery, etc. from a workroom. Much like a proposal, purchase orders and work orders have no true fiscal bearing. Essentially, they can be considered as a request for goods or services from the vendor or a workroom, and really nothing more. It's only when the vendor deposit, if necessary, and the inevitable vendor invoice is recorded against the order does any actual accounting activity take place. So always keep that in mind, that as you're making your orders, you're really not affecting the books at all. So you have a lot of leeway there. Also similar to the proposal, purchase and work orders are dynamic documents, meaning that they can be edited as needed to reflect the changes in the current order with the vendor or workroom, with the caveat that once you begin putting some of that fiscal or accounting activity like a vendor invoice on the purchase order, you may be prevented at that point from editing it. Now, as Design Manager is a fully integrated platform, information from different areas in the software are coordinated together for particular functions, and purchase and work orders are no different. So let's start by examining some of the areas associated throughout the software that feed into the purchase and work order system, and we'll begin with vendors. The vendor payees are listed under our glossaries in Design Manager, all the way down, vendor and payees. In the professional platform, similarly, go to your glossaries drop-down and choose vendor payees, and you can see that the vendor glossary window in both platforms is very similar. Now, in purchase orders, the vendor represents the company or individual from which you're planning on procuring the goods or services, such as Krabbit. In the work order capacity, the workroom itself will be performing the services are stored in the vendor glossary, such as Curtain Call's workroom, along with all the suppliers that Curtain Call may need to gain the different materials to fabricate the treatment for you. So let's take a look at some of the information on the vendor window and how it relates to the purchase and work orders. And we'll use Krabbit as our example. So I can edit Krabbit, and let's take a look here. Obviously, the name and address is quite important, contact information as well. Now, the account number, that'll appear on both the purchase and work order. On the Defaults tab, the PO terms will appear. PO shipped via will also appear. And you do have the ability to change some of that information on a per purchase or work order basis, but it's nice to have it already in your vendor glossary so you don't have to repeat it every time. Design Manager will do that automatically for you. Further, the deposit percentage. If your vendor requires a deposit up front before processing the order, go ahead and put your deposit percentage in here. Design Manager will automatically show that on all of the components. And more conveniently, on the purchase order itself, it'll total up that deposit for you, so both you and the vendor are reminded that you're going to need to remit payment before they process the order. Also, on the Notes Info tab, the email address. Now, if you use Design Manager, you can actually email your reprinted reprinted purchase orders right over to the vendor. And if you have the email address of the appropriate contact filled in on the Notes and Info tab here, Design Manager will automatically use that email address when you do email the PO or work order through the system. Another feature is the Create Ship To option. What this does is it allows you to very quickly create a ship to location from all the vendor information. For example, let's say that Legacy Antiques, I'm going to send off an antique that I purchased at market that I want to have refinished or reupholstered or some other way redone. I don't have a shipping location yet for Legacy Antiques, so I can go Edit, use the Create Ship To, and now if I look at my glossaries, Ship To codes, I just created a Legacy Antiques shipping location. Well, what is a Ship To really? That's another very important part of both purchase and work orders. Really, the Ship To code determines where the vendor will deliver the merchandise for purchase orders, and for work orders, the Ship To location is used to determine both where the finalized product is to be delivered from the workroom, and it also indicates where the various vendors for the materials, fabrics, treatment rods, etc., will be coming from to the workroom. So it's a very handy shipping specialized address just for shipping locations. And the Create Ship To allows us to automatically create a shipping location from a vendor. Okay, so that gives us a little bit of example of some information in the glossaries that pertain to purchase orders. Now, let's kind of move on to actually create a purchase order, which is the more common of the two orders rather than the work order. Now, the first step, obviously, would begin to input the specifications for the goods that we need to purchase. Now, since this webinar is really focusing on the orders themselves, for the most part, I'm going to use existing specifications to keep ourselves on schedule. If you have questions on entering specifications, feel free to go to our help center at knowledge.designmanager.com or call or email support, or even stay tuned for appropriate webinar in the future, just focusing on creating specifications. That being said, I do want to look at some of the specifications to show where this information is going to flow into the purchase order. So in Design Manager, we'll go over to our specifications. And let's use the Carter's Brigantine Beach Home. And let's say that we need to order both our armchair from Century and our leather sofa from Legacy Antiques. If we dive a little bit further into the item itself, in the purchase order capacity, the item window doesn't really have too much to do with the process. Most of the information is going to come from our component window, which we access by editing the PO grid, and jumps us down to our component window, which, as many of you obviously know, is really all that vendor-based information. Now, let's review some of the fields and options on the component window. Obviously, we have our description, and notice that it does say purchase order description there. So I like to remind people, this is only being seen by your vendors. So you really can put sensitive information into the description field on the component window, costing information, terms, manufacturer's catalog number, and you can safely realize that only the vendor will see it and the client never will see that information. Obviously, we need to have a vendor from whom we are ordering the goods or services, Century Furniture in this case. Notice that Century is the vendor is one of our glossaries, so you can use the glossary, or you can always type your codes in directly. The Ship To location. Now the Ship To location actually defaults from our project setup. Notice on the project window we have a default shipping location. In Professional, the same field is located on our projects, site Ship To, and there's our default ship code there. So what that allows us to do is to easily have a default shipping area that'll default down to every component that we add, but will also can be updated as necessary. For example, I may be shipping not directly to the Carter's home, but rather over to a reupholsterer or a third-party staging area, what have you. The vendor deposit, as we just discussed on the vendor glossary window, defaults from Century itself. If we take a look, notice that on my Century vendor window, I've got a 50% deposit, and behold that it does automatically default to the component itself. The MFG CAT number, or manufacturer's catalog number, entirely optional, also known as an item number or a SKU number. If you do input one, it'll show on the purchase order for you. Let's go ahead and pop one in there. Cost and pricing information. In terms of purchase orders, we're only focusing on the cost. Remember, in Design Manager, cost is always the amount the vendor is charging you, while price is what you are charging the client. So all we're focusing on is the unit and, more importantly, extended cost in this capacity for purchase orders. Additional charges. Now notice I've included a freight charge along with the merchandise for the armchair. This allows me to easily estimate to my client what I anticipate the shipping charges will be, and I can even mark it up a little bit for incidentals. Now when I have entered freight in this manner, when I go to make the purchase order, I'm automatically going to select the freight along with the merchandise, as you'll see in a little bit. Let's hop over to our Special Instructions tab. This is a lot of information just for the purchase and work orders. Our purchase order special instructions, I can input any information that I want to convey to the vendor. And if I have a purchase order with multiple components, and each of those components have special instructions, well, Design Manager will actually take all of them and concatenate or link them together so they're all listed at the bottom of the purchase order for the vendor's reference. And we could put something in, oh, I don't know, fabric tears easily. Purchase order side mark. The purchase order side mark also defaults from our project. Let's take a look. Defaults tab. There is my side mark. I've also used the append location to side mark option. So that allows us to not only have the carder's name and code, but every location of the item will automatically be created on the side mark itself. Another feature that we'll be noticing shortly on the purchase order document is the PO designer or extension. If I enter information in here, for example, my name and my extension, it's going to appear in the header of the purchase order. So when Century receives the PO, they're going to know who at my firm to contact regarding the order. And this can also be changed at the time of the purchase order itself. And there's our original side mark from the project, and I'm actually adding in the guest bedroom 1 from the location. CFA required, or cut or cutting for approval required. If I select this option, I'm going to print that in bold on the purchase order to indicate to the vendor that, hey, listen, before you get ready to ship off that fabric or a merchandise with fabric on it, I want to see a piece of that fabric for my own approval. Let's go ahead and select that option. Workroom instructions will be much more applicable when we discuss work orders shortly. The ship on or before date. This will appear on the purchase order to indicate to the vendor when I need them to be shipping off the goods or services from their site in order to keep my timetable working properly. So let's go ahead and say, oh, I don't know, 7:15 perhaps. Now, this is really the two main tabs of information that we're going to be using on our purchase order itself. So let's go ahead and save our chair, and let's go make a purchase order. So we're going to hop off of Project and Specifications, go to Documents and Accounting, and in Design Manager, I can either use the PO Work Order button, or I could right-click on the Purchase and Work Orders folder and select New Purchase or Work Order, whatever you're more comfortable with. Either way, that brings us to the new Purchase Order Work Order window. In Professional, I can use my project drop-down and select Purchase and Work Orders, or I could select the fourth icon off of the Common Control toolbar, get to my Purchase and Work Orders window, type in or search for my desired project, and I would click Add PO. And notice again, our new purchase order windows are very similar in both platforms. Now, the new PO window. This is showing us all of the components in Design Manager for this project that have not yet previously been ordered and have both a valid vendor and ship-to location recorded. Commonly, we get support calls or support incidents saying, hey, I've entered in my component, I don't see it on my purchase order window in order to create a new PO. 9 times out of 10, either the vendor or the ship-to location was left off, and it wouldn't appear on our new PO window for that particular project. So if you find yourself in those circumstances, check that first. Now again, these are only the components that I have not yet ordered for this particular project. If I want to see all of them, I certainly can by using the Show All option in the top right corner. And this gives us all my unordered components, and we can see components for item 9 for Philip Jeffries are listed at the bottom, and we can see this new already purchased column, and then this indicates that these 2 components were included on purchase order 001 back in May. Now, the date defaults to today. Of course, that's going to be the order date, and you can select anything you'd like, type in, use your search, what have you. Again, remember, there is no fiscal activity associated with the purchase order, so the date doesn't have any bearing on your accounting at all. You have your picture option. The picture option is fantastic. It allows you to show images of your materials and goods and services that you're ordering from the vendor right on the purchase order, which works as a great cross-reference or double checking from the vendor side. They might notice that you have an image of one fabric, but you have a manufacturer's catalog of another, and it'll be a nice red flag for them. That's one of the benefits. It does, however, make the document a little bit longer. So if you're looking for brevity in your purchase order, you can go without using the picture option. And you can even have the same flexibility when you're reprinting it. So you might print one out with the pictures on it, and then reprint it later for the vendor's reference without the pictures. And you have all of your common columns that are necessary when we're doing our purchase order selection. Obviously the reference number, which is the unique item and component number for that particular project, vendor, description, cost, type, location, shipped to, and even the catalog number. And just like the vast majority of grids in Design Manager, you can sort by anyone you choose. You can go in reference number order. Notice that my arrows now are listed under a reference number indicating I'm sorting by that column. In this case, I'm sorting in ascending order, in other words, from 1 all the way down to 10. If I click again, I'm going in reverse or descending order, 8s down to 1s. You can do the same with the vendors, etc. And if I'm trying to find a particular vendor, well, I've got my column sorted. Just start typing. L-E-N-T, I'm going to drop right down to my legacy antique components as well. So that allows for quick sorting and searching on the most grids in Design Manager. Also, on this window, you're commonly going to catch a mistake. You might notice that there's an error in spelling or the cost is incorrect, and you want to correct it before making the purchase order, of course. Well, you don't need to go all the way back to your specifications, make the change, come back into Documents and Accounting, make your purchase order. You can access the component window right from here. I can use the Edit Component button, or I can even just double-click and brings up our component window. So I can sort of hop right to the area to make my changes. For example, let's say that the cost of the armchair is not coming in at $500, it's coming in $510, and I want to reflect that. But even more complicated, I don't want to make any changes to the price to the client. I want to honor my original estimated price. Well, I can use my lock price feature, which now separates the cost and price so they're independent of one another. I can change my unit cost, which changes my extended cost, but notice I've kept my list and sell price to the client locked at $650. Another handy feature when such instances occur. We click OK, we now see that my estimated cost for our armchair has increased to $510 as desired. A few more features on this window. We have our Advanced button. What this does is bring up the Project Advanced Options window for the Carter's Brigantine Beach Home, positioned to the Purchase Order tab. And you have a few options here to sort of customize the look and feel of the PO for your liking. For example, you might want to change the title of freight to shipping, which will only change it on the purchase order. You can also tell Design Manager how you want particular component types to be shown on the purchase order. And you have a few options. For instance, installation and labor, I have set to list. This will have them shown separately in the body of the purchase order. While my freight and crating I have set to total. What this option does is it takes all of my freight for all of the different components, sums it together, and prints it at the bottom of the purchase order. Lastly, I have ignore. If I never want to have, say, design fee listed on my purchase order, I could choose ignore here. I can also change the title of purchase order. Now this is only for the purchase order, not for the work order. I might change this to just order, or whatever verbiage suits me the best. I, however, do like purchase order. You have the option to show your company email, show your company website, and lastly, some firms like to always have a purchase order created for each component separately. But they still want the flexibility to select many of them, even from the same vendor, together. But have Design Manager create a separate PO for each one. That is the single item purchase order option. So if you do find yourself in a situation where you're having many POs created rather than having all of the components for a vendor on a single PO, it's probably that this is selected. Okay. Lastly, now our example, we have, I don't know, probably 10 or 12 different components that are not yet ordered. Of course, I've seen instances where there could be hundreds or even thousands of components, and selecting them can be a bit laborious, so we have a ways to do it rapidly in Design Manager. Of course, I can go along and tag all the ones that I want to, but we also have the tag feature. And this allows us to have Design Manager select multiple components based upon some parameters that I throw in there. For example, hey, go ahead and tag them all. I've got my deposits in from my clients. I'm ready to start ordering. And boom, I've got them all selected. I can also undo that by using the untag option, which will remove the tags. And then I have some more fancy features where I could tag for a given proposal. For example, I've got a deposit on proposal, let's see, 1 for the Carters, and I want to start purchasing all of those components. There we go. Untag them. We can also do a particular item. If you have hundreds or thousands of components listed on the grid, even with the searching and sorting features already there, sometimes the single component just eludes you. If I couldn't find a reference number 8, for example, buried within all of my other thousands of components, use the tag by item, pop in the item number, and Design Manager has tagged it for me. Lastly, and most commonly, you could tag for a particular vendor as well. If I wanted to get everything for Cravat today, or let's say Century, I could do so. So don't hesitate to use the tagging feature to quickly select the desired components, and there are similar tagging features also on your proposal window, invoice window, and for the professional platform, your delivery tickets, etc. We, however, can simply manually tag ours. We're going to select our armchair from Century. Notice I've automatically tagged that associated freight, as I mentioned back on the component window, and the same would happen for the Legacy sofa as well. Now that's going to have my freight shown on the purchase order, which I desire. If you don't, you can always unselect them as well. But we'll go ahead and show those. Now from here, all I need to do is hit OK, and Design Manager is going to generate those purchase orders for us. And here's how it does so. Purchase orders are, components are included on a single purchase order with the same combination of vendor and ship to. So if I have some components from Century that are shipping directly to the carters, they're going to be on one purchase order. If I have others from Century that are going to a workroom, they'll be on a second purchase order, and it makes sense to do so, so the vendor knows on a single order where to deliver the particular goods and services. So if you find yourself with multiple Century Furniture purchase orders and you don't want that, generally take a look at the ship to column right here, and you'll see that they're going to have different shipping locations. We can see some of our information that we put back on our component window. Here's our ship on or before date. There's our special instructions. Our design or phone extension defaulted from the project as we saw. And our ship via came from the individual vendors, Legacy and Century. If I didn't put the information on the component window, I can do it here as well. Use the Edit button, and I could put some additional information for my Legacy Antiques purchase order. We could put in shipping by, let's see, the 18th. I could even put a verbal reference number or some other descriptor to appear on the purchase order for both my reference and Legacy's. Something as simple as leather sofa. And I could even put special instructions here as well. Include instructions for leather care. And there we go. And now I'll have those on my Legacy purchase order. An underutilized feature on POs is the purchase order components listing report. Now, I've seen purchase orders for various vendors that are literally scores or even hundreds of pages long, and it becomes pretty difficult to review. The component listing report summarizes that in a much more concise format, so I can look at this information first, make sure that all of my data and input is accurate, and then I can go and actually process the purchase orders. So it's a very handy and yet underutilized feature, because this information is the exact information that will appear on the purchase orders themselves. Further, it's a nice report to have for to give to a expediter or perhaps a controller, or even to keep a much more consolidated physical listing of the purchase orders rather than having these big voluminous books of them. Note one thing, here is my printer selection. In Design Manager, we often get questions about how do printers work. It always seems to be selecting a different printer. Here's how. For reports, the printer will always be your default printer in either your Windows or Mac environments. Documents such as purchase orders, proposals, checks, client invoices, all save the selected printer that was used last. So, for example, I may have a printer in my office that always prints in triplicate because I want my purchase orders printed as such. Design Manager, that may not be my default printer because I don't have triplicates of my day-to-day reports. Design Manager will save that printer for me for my purchase orders. So once, if you're printing to the incorrect printer, make a new purchase order, select it on the printer drop-down, and once you accept these purchase orders, Design Manager will save that. And that's how the whole printer selection works in Design Manager in the most simplistic form. From here, if we click OK, we're going to have our print preview windows of our purchase orders. Again, if I didn't use my PO component list, which we just were looking at, I use my print preview window to verify all of my information. So here's our first of our two purchase orders. This is the one for Century. Century is going to be shipping directly over to the carters. I've got all of my default information, the ship by that I entered, my ship via, account, and terms all come from the Century vendor. In the body, we have the quantity and unit of measure. We have our description, including any of the formatting. Notice, here's my cutting for approval required with asterisks end in bold to alert Century that I need to have a sample of this fabric coming over. I've got the catalog number, and I even have the side mark created as well. I've got columns for my unit and extended costs, which in our example here are similar. And here is the image of the armchair itself. Again, you can see how this would create a little bit of a longer document, but I do feel that having the picture there is both aesthetically pleasing and it does provide for a nice cross-reference of information and verifying that I'm ordering the proper good or service. We have our totals of the merchandise. Here's my freight. Again, it's not being listed in the body because we are having freight set to total. So it shows in the total of the regions down here. And then I sum up the entire PO and the grand total. I've got my special instructions. Fabric tears easily. Again, if I had multiple components, they would all be listed beneath the special instructions. I've got my deposit enclosed. Century requires me to put up 50% of the merchandise cost, and here it is, both for my information and for Century's. And I can even sign and date the purchase order to verify that I do approve of it today. If we use our next or right arrow, we can see our second purchase order. This one's for Legacy. Again, they're shipping off to the Carters as well. I've got the ship by date that I entered in manually. I don't have an account number filled in with Legacy. That's quite fine. Again, that comes from the vendor itself. Terms, side mark, there's our picture. Those are the instructions that I entered sort of on the fly. And I also have a 50% deposit enclosed for Legacy as well. From here, once I'm satisfied with all my information, I found no spelling errors, the addresses, shipping locations are all to my liking. I could print out copies with the printer icon. I can also use the email or export, where I can email copies to the vendors or to myself, and I can export into all the standard and common formats such as your Adobe PDF, the Microsoft Word, Excel, even HTML, whatever you're most comfortable using. Once everything is done and I'm happy with the purchase orders, I close the print preview with the X in the top right corner, and I always remember to accept. Another common technical support question that comes along is, well, I have this copy of these purchase orders in my hand, but they're not into Design Manager. Well, 99% of the time, that is because the user hit reject here. If I hit reject, I may have copies of these physically on my desk, but as far as Design Manager is concerned, those have not yet been processed. So once everything is to your liking, make sure you accept. And in Design Manager, here's our brand new purchase orders listed under our purchase order folder for the Carters. So that is a really in-depth look at the purchase order side. We can hop over to work orders momentarily, but what I'd like to do is see if there's any unanswered questions out there. Lindsay, do we have any?
Brad, we just have one, and they were wondering about what would be the best report if you wanted to print just a list of the purchase orders that were out there for a project. They didn't know if that would be good to do with the one that you showed them or if there was a different one.
Excellent, excellent question. The component list report that I just showed is a fantastic day-to-day operational report if your firm requires something like that. It's basically showing the POs you made that day. But under reports, project management, order tracking, we have two for the attendees' questions. You have the open purchase orders, which will give me a listing of all purchase orders that have not yet been received in full or a vendor invoice recorded against, and I can put in a variety of parameters, order dates, particular projects or vendors. And I have its sister report, which is the purchase order listing. This will show all the purchase orders for a given order date, project, vendor, etc. So those reports are always out there, and I use them more as a weekly or monthly analysis rather than the component listing report, which is more of my kind of day-to-day operational report. Does that answer the question, Lindsay, or is there a follow-up on that?
No, you look all clear, Brad.
Fantastic. Okay, so we spent a lot of time on the Design Manager platform. Let's hop over to Professional for a while, and we'll talk about work orders. So now that we've covered purchase orders, work orders are a little bit more of a complex concept. The work order is a document for a workroom to describe what service, refinish, upholster, new fabrication or treatment, etc., that you desire. It's also going to show all the necessary components required to finish the project, from what vendor they are arriving, and all of the necessary workroom cost information. Just like POs, let's start with specifications as we begin our analysis of work orders. And we'll use the Hilson project. And I have a window treatment for the master bedroom. Now let's take a look at this. Window treatments in particular can be comprised of many components. As we all know, window treatments are complicated fabrications, and they involve a lot of material, a lot of merchandise, and a lot of labor. So this one has 23 components, and I've seen them as high as, I don't know, 75 or even 100 for super complicated triple treatments, etc. Unlike purchase orders, there is some information on the item window itself that pertains to the work order. First, the description itself. The description on the item will also appear in the header of the work order document. So remember, when you're entering in the client description on the item window for a work order treatment, remember that both the vendor and the client will be seeing that, and to craft your description accordingly. Secondly, on our Workroom tab, obviously we're going to have some information here. First is the Workroom vendor. This is the company or individual who will actually be fabricating our treatment or whatever service they're providing. In this case, the curtain calls Workroom. This is just another vendor, like all of my other vendors, Kravet, Baker, etc. The Ship Finished Project 2. This is going to tell the workroom, hey, when you're finished, where should the treatment go? In this case, they'll be shipping it directly to the Hilsons. But it could be somewhere else. I could be shipping it to my company, to another workroom for additional work, a third-party staging area, etc. Both of these will appear also on the header of the work order. Lastly is the workroom instructions. These are to communicate overall instructions to the workroom regarding the treatment or fabrication as a whole. Also will appear in the header of the work order document. So we do have a bunch of information that is pertinent on the item window itself. Do pay attention to the CCWR code here, as we're going to be referring to that guy momentarily as we look at the component information for our work order. Now again, we have 23 different components here, all pertaining to this window treatment. So let's see some information on one of these. Let's take a look at our main fabric, for example. On the component window, in regards to work orders, the description, this again will only be seen by the vendor or the workroom itself, and it is worth pointing out. For work orders, these components are commonly both on purchase orders and work orders and are allowed to do so. So the information is shared, integrated in Design Manager, but I can create work orders and purchase orders for the same component. So don't feel that you're going to have any conflict there. The vendor is who I am purchasing the particular fabric from. In some cases, it might actually be the workroom itself for lining or various poles or other merchandise. The ship to. In regards to work orders, this is very critical. the ship to of the component must be the exact same as the workroom of the item. So we have our CCWR, which I made a point to point out is the exact same on both. And that's critical to actually create the work order properly. The manufacturer's catalog number, this is also going to appear on the work order. This is the manufacturer's catalog number from Kravit, and Curtain Call will use this information to cross-reference. They're going to be getting in all of these different fabrics from Kravit, etc., and they want to make sure they have the right ones. So the manufacturer's catalog number will appear there. The cost. Now, the cost on the work order will only show for components that are for the workroom itself. For example, the labor of the workroom will, of course, show a cost, and if I'm actually procuring the merchandise from the workroom itself, that will also show. My other cost, for example, the cost for this fabric from Kravit, will not be displayed on the work order, so you have your cost relationship with your vendors kept to yourself, and the workroom does not need to know anything about that. I could have some freight, of course, or other additional charges. On our special instructions, I can actually input a side mark, of course, which is also a good cross-referencing tool for the workroom to ensure they're getting the right merchandise matched up. And I have my workroom special instructions. This allows me to put information of the component itself, the peculiarities of a particular fabric, or any issues or unusual conditions of the repeats, or those sort of things. Whatever I might need to put in there. So, on the specification side, there's a lot of information both on the item for the description and the workroom information, and the component, of course, also has a lot of intricacies that need to be that are going to filter in to the work order itself. So let's take a look at how all this blends together. We'll hop out of our specifications. We'll go to Project, Purchase and Work Orders. Type in our code. And in this case, we're not going to do Add PO. We're going to do Add Work Order. Then Design Manager, we go back to Documents and Accounting, select our project, Purchase Work Order, and we would just change our type from PO to Work Order. And you can see how the window changes appropriately. So, just like we have on our components to select for a purchase order, we have all of our components for our window treatment. On the new work order window, I'm going to show all components that have a ship to location that matches the workroom of the item. And you can see we have the workroom listed as Curtain Calls, and the shipping, the vendor location, shipping location for each matches exactly. With work orders, unlike POs, you need to focus on one at a time. So, like a purchase order, I can select many different components from many vendors. A work order must be done individually. So we'll focus only on our window treatment for item number 9. Now, I need to select all 23 various components here. So I'm going to go back to my tag, and I'm going to tag them all. Again, making my life as easy as possible. From here, click on our OK. Then we get to our Generated Work Orders window. I can go ahead and put some information in. Ship via, I need this at the end of the month, and they can contact me directly. Go down, and let's see our print preview of our work order. And I find this document to be extremely interesting. So let's see what we have here. We have our work order title. I've got my Curtain Calls workroom as the selected workroom. They'll be shipping the treatment right to the Hilson's house. I've got the image of the item, the overall concept of the window treatment. In the header here, there's our client description being listed. So remember, that's going to be seen by both the client and the workroom in this case. Here's my workroom instructions. And then in the body of the document, we start to see all of the pieces. For example, here's our fabric, the Peruvian orange from Kravet. I've got their catalog number there. And conveniently listed, I have the company address and who to contact. So the folks over at Curtain Call know to give Mr. Draper a call or even email him to say, hey, listen, we haven't yet received item 22598 for the Vita Nova project. What's the status on it? I've got the catalog number again, side mark. I've got my workroom instructions just for the piece of the Peruvian orange fabric listed beneath. I've got a handy fabric display as a picture of each of the pieces for the workroom. The interlining has I'm purchasing directly from the workroom. So I do see the cost there. But note, I don't see the cost on my fabric or my lining. I do see the costs for the labor because this work order is going to act as a sort of de facto purchase order to allow me to pay Curtain Call directly. And similarly, I have some of the hardware. Again, no cost being listed all the way through. Again, there's my interlining, which I'm actually purchasing from the Curtain Calls, but the lining I am not, and more labor, all the way down. The totals here represent the interlining that I'm buying directly from Curtain Call and all of their labor. None of the costs for the other fabric or hardware is being shown. Also notice the first page, we have all that extra information. It's kind of what we call the header, but we don't repeat that for the other pages to save space as much as possible because work orders by nature can get pretty long. So from here, we verify all of our accuracy. We can print, we can export. Once we're happy with everything, we can go ahead and accept. And there we go. So now we have a work order versus a purchase order. Lindsay, any questions on the work order concept?
Brad, I don't have any questions right now.
Okay, fantastic. Well, we're almost towards the end of the webinar, so let's go ahead and wrap it up with a few of the final concepts of purchase and work orders. Now, obviously, back on our standard platform, our Design Manager platform, we've created these purchase and work orders. Now, there could be cases where I need to reprint one. Now, reprinting a purchase or work order is making an exact copy of the order as it currently exists. And this is different than editing one, which we'll discuss next as we conclude the webinar. If you have not made any changes that you want to have reflected in the purchase or work order, do not edit. You're going to reprint. Otherwise, you could inadvertently make unwanted changes by updating cost information or removing or adding a component accidentally. So if you want a copy, just reprint. Now in Design Manager, I'm going to go under our purchase and work orders, highlight the desired PO, and we can hit the reprint button, or we can right-click and do print view. Under Professional, we simply highlight the desired document and use the reprint button. So from here, we could actually reprint, and we have some handy options. One, I could email one directly off to the vendor. For example, let's say I want to send off Kravet's purchase order via email. When I have the email option selected, I'm not going to show my print preview. I'm actually exporting it into a PDF format. Behind the scenes, Design Manager is accessing my Microsoft Outlook. For those of you with our cloud space technology can utilize that, and bingo. Not only does it have my purchase order attached as a PDF, it even grabs the vendor email address that we saw back on our vendor glossary window. Get rid of that guy. Take a look. I can optionally include pictures as we discussed before, but I can even show actual deposits. What this will do, it allows me to show any invoices or deposits that I've already paid on a particular purchase order. As we can see, here is my original amount in freight. I've paid half of that with check 10,006 back in December, and it acts as almost a current estimated balance due or an accounting update as well. So reprinting has its own additional features. That is in direct contrast to editing. Unlike reprinting, you will edit a purchase or work order to reflect any changes necessary to convey to the vendor or workroom. Any changes made in the specifications to the components on the order will automatically be reflected during the edit process. In Standard and in Design Manager, we simply highlight the purchase order, hit the Edit button, or we right-click and hit Edit. In the Professional platform, we simply select the appropriate project, grab the purchase order in question, and click Edit. And a few things on the Edit Change Order window. Notice, it does not say New Purchase Order. It now says Edit Change Order for the purchase order. So if you see this information, you're not adding, you're not reprinting, you're editing this current purchase order. The date was the original order date. I've got an option for change order. If that option is selected, and it is by default, Design Manager is going to print change order as the title rather than purchase order. And it'll use the revision date as the current date. If I unselect that, I'll have the original date listed and it'll still say purchase order. I find change order much more effective as it indicates to the vendor and to myself that I have made revisions. Now, let's say that our sofa was not actually $2,500 but $2,550. Well, like we saw before, I could go back to my specifications and make those changes, or I could simply double-click, change the amount to $2,550, and in fact, there's some freight from America's Mattress as well, say $100. Now, my cost has gone up to $2,550, and I can select my freight, back down to OK. Back to my familiar generated purchase order window. We hit OK. And now we have a change order. Again, I find that very convenient since I know that I've made edits. This alerts me to that fact and the vendor as well. I've got a brand new order date of today rather than the original of December of 13. I've increased my cost by the $50, and lo and behold, I have my freight as well. So, like the proposal, the PO is a living document. Fabrics change, those sort of things happen. Prices are updated from what the current catalog says, etc. The purchase order can be used to reflect that to keep all your estimated values as accurate as possible. And upon accepting, we now see that my purchase order amount has increased by the additional $50 and the $100 of freight. So editing, you want to convey to the vendor or workroom that you have made changes, and you can do so using the edit function rather than adding a new purchase order, which of course you wouldn't do, or reprinting one which is an exact copy. And that brings us to the end of our presentation today on purchase and work orders, and I'd be happy to field any questions that are yet unanswered, Lindsay.
Brad, we only had one that I thought was nice to share with the group about when does the cost actually hit the books if it's not going to hit the books with the purchase orders and work orders.
Excellent question. Design Manager utilizes accrual accounting, okay? And in accrual accounting, the magic always happens when an invoice is generated. On the client side, I make a client invoice. That's where I generate my revenue, cost of goods sold, I accrue sales tax if applicable, those sort of things. On the vendor side, the cost goes in to the books when I go and make my vendor invoices on purchase orders. As such. So now if I would be paying our brand new curtain call workroom work order, once I post this vendor invoice, I would actually have that $650 into my either work in process or cost of goods. So it's the act of processing the invoice that makes it hit the books.
Okay. And that's all the questions that we have today.
Well, fantastic, and thank you everyone for again joining us for our weekly webinars, and I'll turn it back over to Lindsay to conclude.